Live from a bunker in Cambodia, this is Mr. V's Garage Band coming at you with twice the power today. Hey, sorry we missed you yesterday, but had to take a day off, hang out with the family. But we've got a double header for you today, starting with this wonderful, long, cylindrical, mostly brass instrument called a sackbut. Okay, well, its old ancestors were called sackbut. No, it's the trombone, sometimes called the slipstick, the slidey toot-toot, and it is the funnest, most crazy, wacko instrument out there other than the slide whistle. Why? Because there's no buttons, there's no keys, there's just this big, long slide in it. It makes it so much fun to play. But first, I have a story and not an endorsement, a shout out to all those awesome people out there on the front lines doing the thing to make us happy and healthy and be able to stay home and do our part to lower the curve. Sounds like we might actually get to go back to school in the fall if we do this thing right, which would be awesome, because I miss all you band kids out there and I miss all my teacher friends. But hey, if we can't have school, we might as well have your favorite Facebook Live action here in Mr. V's Garage Band. Also want to give a special shout out to all you public school and St. Joe's friends who are out there doing maintenance things. People like Mr. Mark Summers and his maintenance crew, and especially the maintenance crew at GMMS, who Mr. Shane Reedy, our awesome head custodian at GMMS, was a trombone player. And one of his favorite stories to tell young band kids, especially young trombone players, is that the most awesome thing to do with a trombone, and if you're a trombone player, you already know this, the most awesome thing to do with a trombone, especially in marching band, is if you're going along playing, to take that slide and go whack, and smack somebody right in the back of the head or the back of the foot or something fun like that. You just got to be careful that you don't actually let the slide go, because then you just go phew, off into oblivion. Well, that would be a problem. So, we hope that you don't do that. That could lead to somebody getting hurt, or even worse yet, the trombone getting hurt. But let's talk a little bit about the trombone. Like all other brass instruments, it has a really cool bowl-shaped mouthpiece. In fact, I could take this exact mouthpiece and stuff it into a baritone euphonium. Remember our friend, the conical-shaped brass instrument that with the valves that sounds kind of like a baby tuba? If I could take this mouthpiece, I could stick it in that instrument and it would play just fine. They use practically the same exact kind of mouthpiece. The difference is that this instrument obviously is not very conical. You can see the slide, mostly pretty straight cylindrical tubing. Even right up here on the last bow, you really don't get a whole lot of conical expanding tubing until you get right here on the last end of it. We talked about there are no buttons, right? It's just this big long slide, and which means that in theory there are infinite number of different notes. Keeping track at home, that is called a glissando, and it is a very unique sound to a trombone. Like I said, there's only one other instrument out there in the band, that's the slide whistle, that can actually make that exact kind of sound. Well, suppose you could take a timpani drum and kind of do it. Yeah, but mostly slide whistle, mostly trombones, that's about it. There are 7 spots on the slide that kind of correspond to different sections of pipe we would open up with the baritone or trumpet. We call those slide positions. They're roughly an inch and a half apart, each one of them. But if I go too far, that slide can come right off, and then we're in trouble. And I might be in trouble anyway, because now I've got to try and get this back on live TV. Oh, whew, just good thing I just had this thing greased up. All right, so let's talk a little bit about where trombone comes from. Trombone dates back to very, 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 very old style instruments. Not quite as old as those big open cornus or tubas that the Romans had, but definitely by the end of the Middle Ages, getting it into the Italian Renaissance, the ancestor of the trombone called the sackbut was beginning to be used. In fact, we have documentation of a man by the name of Giovanni Gabrielli, who served as the master of music at a very unique church in Venice, St. Marco or San Marco, in a cathedral there that was built. If you think of most churches, big churches especially, they kind of have like the big layout, the march down to the altar, and then maybe you'd have a choir loft or something off to the either off to the side or in the back. Well, San Marco in Venice is built such that there is a choir loft over here and a choir loft over on the other side. And it was kind of the original surround sound. If you'd go to church and you could hear, there'd be a choir or a group of instruments playing up there, and then there would be a choir or group of instruments over on the other side, and they would play back and forth to each other over the top of the congregation. And it kind of developed its own official title. It was called antiphonal music, singing back and forth to each other or playing back and forth to each other. Anyways, Gabrielli took the common brass instruments of the day, the cornet, and which is like a kinder, gentler version, a more conical version of the trumpet, primitive cornets and sackbuts, and some early iterations of what we come to know as the French horn, and put them in those two choir lofts, and they would play back and forth. It's kind of a standard. Several years ago, there was a redoing of much of Gabrielli's music by a group called the National Brass Ensemble. They took some of the finest brass players from all over the world and redid some of his music for a more modern day sound. I encourage you to go check that documentary out and the album that went with it. Anyways, so trombone has a long history. Great composers like Johann Sebastian Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven incorporated trombones into their music, or sackbuts into their music, as a means to help men, high voiced tenors and bass voices, help carry the melody. A fun word that I learned about this when I was learning the Mozart Requiem was called colla parte, which means basically on the same part. Thank you, Dr. Charles Brown, for enlightening me with that a long time ago. And Mozart especially would use the trombones to help the bass voices and tenor voices sing that melody line when they had it. When you get into the 1800s, trombones kind of began to grow. The section became a little bit bigger. They added some trombones have a very, very cool attachment right here for your thumb and some extra piping, and so it makes it a little bit easier to get to some of the notes that would ordinarily be way far down the slide. That happens as valve technology becomes more available, and then finally in the latter half of the 1800s and the 1900s, as wind bands and marching bands and circus bands take over, and of course jazz bands following later, the trombone family kind of took over the role that a cello would play, playing that tenor voice or that higher baritone-esque voice.